What's up, Woodmont Student Ministry? Welcome to virtual life groups. I don't know if you're watching this with your family or with a small group of friends, but I do know that we will not be together for life groups this week or this month. And I'm sorry about that. I'm going to miss being with you, but I hope that if you're watching this as a family, I hope that this is a great, wonderful time for you guys. We're going to have a little bit of a teaching here on the front end. And then at the end, I have some discussion questions and maybe even a suggestion for an activity that your family will be able to do. But first, why are you in my pantry? Why are you here? Well, I'm going to eat some pretzels and talk to you a little bit about the teaching for this week. Well, I think we all know that eating is a necessary part of life. We all have to eat to survive. There was even one study done that said the average person is going to spend 35,000 hours over the course of their lifetime eating. To break that down even a little bit more, that's the equivalent of if you were to eat for 12 straight hours a day, you'd be eating for 8 years nonstop. And I think it's funny that even after the 34,999th meal, you'd still be hungry for the next meal. You'd still want the 35,000th meal. Food is a necessary part of our life. It's a way to get to our hearts. I know that someone really loves and cares about me when I go over to their house and they put food that they have spent time working on or food that they know I love in front of me. Every single one of us loves going to Golden Corral. It's a wonderful experience and the best meal that you have all year when you choose Golden Corral for your birthday meal, which I know you do.
Every night at the Beef Lovers Banquet, victory never tastes so great. Golden Corral, your choice, rules.
And I think Jesus knew this. No, not knew that we'd go to Golden Corral, but I think he knew that food was such an important part of our life. We're going to look at a story from John here in just a moment that has to do with food. And a lot of Jesus' important teachings revolve around food. And I think that he does this because he knows that food is a way to get to our heart. And when people start talking about food, we listen. When you smell someone cooking a good meal, you perk up a little bit. You're ready to pay attention. So Jesus is going to take this opportunity here in the book of John to teach us a lesson about food. John chapter 6 verse 2 tells us that there's this big group of people. It's a crowd. They had started to gather because they had heard about Jesus. Their interest and their curiosity in this man had started to peak, and they wanted to go be around him. So they end up finding Jesus on this hill. And they're sitting there hoping that they see something miraculous. I mean, maybe some of them wanted to even be healed. And maybe others just wanted to see a miracle take place with their own eyes. So John goes on to tell us that 50,000 people gather in this crowd. They're all there to see Jesus. But that number of 50,000 is perhaps a little misleading because the number of 50,000 doesn't count any of the women or children that would have been there. It only counts the men. So it's believed that the actual number of people who gathered was somewhere closer to 15 and 20,000 people here in John chapter 6 have gathered on this hill to see Jesus. And I just looked it up, and Bridgestone Arena, where the Preds play, fits 20,000 people. So picture this with me for a minute. All of the people that would fit inside Bridgestone Arena for a Preds game show up to hear Jesus. And Jesus looks at his disciples and he says, maybe what would have been like the most anxiety-inducing words ever if you were a follower of Jesus. He said, hey, I want to feed all of these people. Jesus asked them, where can we buy food for these people to eat? All 20,000 of them. Can we just make that happen real quick? So keep in mind that they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have the internet. They couldn't just hop onto an app and order a food delivery service to come deliver food for all 20,000 people. It wasn't that easy. And even today, when we're planning youth group events or when we're having camp or a retreat or something like that, it takes weeks and weeks of planning to feed the 100 of us that go on a retreat. It takes weeks of planning and a lot of money to feed people. And Jesus looks at his followers with 20,000 hungry people on this hill and says, hey, where can we get food for all of these people? So a couple of Jesus' followers started to think this through. How can we feed these people? And Philip looks at Jesus, one of Jesus' followers, and he basically says, Jesus, we don't have the money. Even if we wanted to, we couldn't afford to feed all these people. And Andrew looks at Jesus and says kind of the same thing. He says, we don't have the resources for this. There's no way that we can pull this off. But just like in the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, Jesus already knows how this story is going to end. He already knows how he's going to feed all 20,000 of these people. He's really just drawing his disciples' attention to the problem at hand. There's no real feasible way to feed 20,000 people other than by an act of God. So I would assume that most of you have probably heard the story of the feeding of the 5,000. We know how the story ends. But I want us to look at one thing that might not pop out at us immediately. I want us to look at how the crowd responds to Jesus. So I want us to look at John chapter 6, verse 15 for just a minute. The crowds have just realized that Jesus is this miraculous prophet who can turn fish and bread into food for 20,000 people. And this is how they respond. Verse 15 tells us that the crowd was going to come and try to take Jesus by force to make him their king. They're going to try to make him do something against his will to become their king. Once the crowd saw for themselves the miracles that Jesus could do, and when they actually witnessed it with their own eyes, they tried to force Jesus to be their king. They were looking for some kind of king or political leader who could provide for them, or who could overthrow the Roman Empire so that they, the Jews, could have power again. They were trying to force Jesus to be this person for them. So it seems like the crowds that were there didn't care at all about what Jesus had to say. They didn't care about his teachings. They didn't care about why Jesus said he had come into the world, or why he was showing up and doing miracles in the first place. All that the crowd seems to care about is what Jesus could do for them. So I think Jesus starts to pick up on this when it says that the crowds were going to force him to be king. I think Jesus starts to realize that the crowds didn't care what he had to say. They only cared about what he could do. And so what does Jesus do? He kind of dodges them. He kind of bails. He's like, I'm getting out of here. Later on in Scripture, when other people are trying to put Jesus in these positions of power, Jesus will look at them and say, I am here to take a position of power. I'm here to be the part of the coming kingdom of God. But that kingdom is going to look very different than what you expect. I'm not coming as a king, as an earthly king at least. I'm coming as a king of the heavens, coming as the King of Kings. And the crowd who is looking at Jesus only to see what he can do for them is about to learn that lesson. So later on here in John chapter 6, starting in verse 25, Jesus is in this town called Capernaum. And when he's in this town, some of the people who had just been up on the hill with him the day before, they corner Jesus and they try to talk him into feeding them on a regular basis. So they want that very same miracle that had just happened to keep happening. They only really want Jesus for what he can do for them. But Jesus replies, and he tries to talk them into something different. Jesus, instead of saying yes to their offer, he repeatedly starts to invite them into believing in him. Here in verse 26, it says, Jesus answered them, Truly, truly, I say to you, you are seeking me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Because you ate what I gave you. You got to enjoy the bread. That's the only reason you're seeking after me. But the crowd continued to try to manipulate Jesus. They looked at him and said, Sir, give us this bread always. So I think the implication of what is happening here is the crowd is essentially telling Jesus, we will only believe in you if you keep providing for our basic needs. If you keep doing miraculous things, then we will believe in you. And if you keep providing for us, we'll follow you. But that's really the only way and time that we're going to do it. But we're getting to the point of what I think this story is trying to tell us. Jesus refused to supply on-demand miracles for this group of people. And so ultimately the crowd gets disinterested and they leave because Jesus isn't willing to be a wizard for them. He's not willing to be someone who only is going to do miraculous things on demand. It's not how Jesus works. I think perhaps we still care more about what Jesus can do for us than what Jesus has to say to us. Now don't get me wrong. I believe that we're in a real relationship with Jesus. And in real relationships with other people, with relationships with my friends or my parents or family or whatever it might be, it's a two-way street. So I do think it's fair of us to expect Jesus to show up in our life. I do think it's fair of us to expect Jesus to do miracles in our life. But I think what this story might be trying to teach us is that we can't expect Jesus to only do miracles in our life. Because Jesus has expectations of us as well. And one of those expectations is that we're going to care about what he says and what he has to teach us. If we want to learn the voice of Jesus, a good place to start is with the Bible, where we can actually learn what the voice of Jesus sounds like. We can learn what the words that Jesus used are. And so I think in our world today, and students, you may know this better than me, but I think in our world today, many people follow Jesus when it's easy to. When it's easy for us to follow Jesus, when it's cool for us to follow Jesus, it's something that we do. It's easy. But then they're quick to abandon him and maybe abandon what he has to say when life gets hard, when trials hit, or when temptations come our way. People often abandon Jesus. But true believers of Jesus, the true followers of Jesus, the disciples in this story, or the disciples in our world today, the followers of Jesus, cling to Jesus, continue to follow Jesus, even when it's difficult. Even when there's temptations in your life, even when your life is difficult, even when it's hard, true followers of Jesus still follow Jesus in the good and in the bad. Even when it feels like Jesus isn't showing up for us, true followers of Jesus still follow him, and still pursue him, and still study his word, and still pray, because that's how we stay in relationship with Jesus. So I think maybe one of the points of this story is that Jesus is the bread of life. He says as much here in John chapter 6. Jesus sustains us by giving us the bread of life, or by giving us water, giving us a drink that will never make us thirsty again. That's what he offers us. That's the spiritual life that Jesus invites us into, as a place where we will never be hungry and never be thirsty again. He meets our spiritual needs. And yes, we have physical needs. And I think one of the lessons you can also pull from this story is that Jesus cares about our physical needs. Jesus feeds the people who are hungry. But when the hungry crowds come and try to manipulate Jesus for their own gain, Jesus doesn't play that game. He's not interested in being a part of that. I think maybe the ultimate point of this story is Jesus is looking for followers who care about what he says, and want to have a real relationship with him, more than followers who just are looking for Jesus to do miraculous things. He cares more about the relationship with us than anything else. So I think maybe a fun way for you and your family to live this out, to reteach it to yourselves, is cook a meal together. I think it would be awesome if you and your family chose maybe one night this week that you could all cook dinner together, or maybe pick a lunch where you guys are all making something together. Maybe you could even have some fun with it and do like a Top Chef style tournament where everyone gets the same ingredients, and you have to see who can make the best meal out of spaghetti, jello, and bread. But if you don't want to do that, maybe you're looking for something more sentimental, or maybe something more meaningful. Maybe something fun that you could do is, if you have a family recipe that your family has had in your family for generations, make that together. Parents, teach your kids, this was your grandmother's recipe. She would always make this. And do it as a family. While you're doing that, talk about the importance of food. Why do we care about food? Why is it important that we cook our food? Why is it important that you get proper portion sizes? Parents, use this video as your excuse to teach your kids a little bit about cooking. And when you're done cooking your meal, take everything that you have. Maybe you heated up some bread. This is frozen bread that I love. It's about one of the only things that I can cook without looking at a recipe or without looking at instructions. But take the food that hopefully you and your family have just made, or you and your friends have just made, and go to your table. And while you're at your table, I have a couple things that I would love for you to talk about, a couple discussion questions. So question number one that I would love for you guys to talk about as a family is, hopefully you just spent some time cooking a meal together, or you're going to spend some time cooking a meal together. When you sit down to eat your food, a question that I would love for you to talk about is, you just made a meal for the 4 of your family, or the 6 of your family, or however many people you're with. You just made food for that many people. How would you respond if Jesus asked you to cook food for 20,000 people? Where would you start? What would you do? What would you try to make? How would you even think about cooking food for 20,000 people? Because I'd imagine it was pretty difficult to even do it just for your family. So how would you do it for 20,000 people? The second thing that might be a great thing for your family to do is to open up your Bible. It might be a great idea to read John chapter 6, verses 1 through 15. That's where the majority of the story that we talked about today comes from. And as you're reading, I would love for you guys to talk about, and maybe students, for you to answer the question, how do Philip and Andrew respond? I told you how I think they respond, but how would you characterize their responses to Jesus when Jesus says, we're going to feed all of these people? How do Philip and Andrew respond? What do you think about their responses? Do you relate to it? Do you think that they should have responded in a different way? How would you characterize Philip and Andrew's responses to Jesus? So I'll put a couple other discussion questions in the newsletter here that you can read and you can talk through as a family, depending on how much time you want to spend doing this. But the last question that I would really, really love for your family to talk about, maybe towards the end of your meal or the end of your discussion, is this. What is the difference between desiring Jesus for who he is and desiring Jesus for what he can give us? What's the difference? What's the difference between desiring Jesus for who he is and what he can give us? I hope that these questions are helpful. I hope that this might be a fun exercise for your family to hopefully cook a meal together, watch this video together, and do some of these discussion group questions together. Parents, I hope that this might give you a little bit of an insight into what student ministry life groups have been like for this school year. Obviously, it's a little bit different, and I know some of you are trail guides and you get to experience it all the time. But for others of you, this might be your very first time ever being a part of a student ministry life group. So welcome. I'm so glad that you guys are here. And I hope you've seen by now that we are going to have a 3-minute film festival for student ministry here at the end of the month. So here's the idea. We're asking you guys, whether it be students or families or trail guides, to create 3-minute videos, fun videos, whatever you want it to be. Make it a trick shot video or an unboxing video or a tutorial video or a music video, whatever you want it to be. Make a 3-minute video and send it my way. And then on January 30th, we're all gonna hop on a Zoom call together. We're gonna watch our videos and we're gonna give out some awards. We're gonna have like a film festival with our youth group. So I know Olivia and I are making a video. We have a fun plan that I don't wanna totally spoil, but all that I will say is it involves hot chicken. And I can't wait for you guys to see it. So if you want to be a part of that, check the newsletter for more details. I would love, love, love to have you and your family make a video and participate. But even if you don't make a video, you're more than welcome to join us for the film festival on January 30th. So I think that's all we have this week. I love you guys. I love your family. Please let me know if we can do anything for you. See you next time.